His nephew trusted no one after the orphanage. The widow next door earned it in a week. The boy arrived on the Tuesday stage, sitting between a feed salesman and a woman in a feathered hat, with a paper tag pinned to his coat that read, Miles Tully, Briar Hill, Nebraska, to be collected. He was 10 years old, small for his age, with a thin face and watchful eyes, and the compressed stillness of a child who has learned that drawing attention is dangerous. He had a canvas satchel on his lap that he held with both hands, and he did not speak to the salesman, or the woman, or the driver when the stage stopped. Don Tully was waiting at the depot. He was 36, a bachelor rancher who had spent the last 14 years turning 160 acres of Nebraska grassland into a cattle operation that was modest, solvent, and precisely organized. He had received the letter from the territorial orphanage 3 weeks ago, informing him that his brother's son, Miles, was being released into his custody, pursuant to his brother's will. His brother, Parnell Tully, had died of influenza in January, and Parnell's wife had died 2 years before that, and Miles had spent 10 months in the orphanage while the territorial courts processed the custody paperwork. Don had not seen Miles since the boy was 4. He had not seen his brother since a disagreement about their father's estate had turned into a silence that lasted 6 years and ended only when the letter from the orphanage arrived. He stood at the depot and watched the boy climb down from the stage with his satchel and his paper tag, and his expression that gave nothing away, and he felt the weight of every one of those 6 years. Miles, he said. The boy looked at him. The eyes were Parnell's, dark, quick, assessing, and the mouth was set in a line that was too old for 10. I am your Uncle Don. I know who you are. Welcome to Briar Hill. Miles said nothing to this. He followed Don to the wagon and climbed up and sat with the satchel in his lap and his hands on the satchel and his eyes on the road, and he did not speak during the 3-mile ride to the ranch. The house was a 2-room cabin with a loft. Don had built a cot in the loft for Miles, with a blanket and a pillow and a shelf for his things. Miles climbed the ladder and sat on the cot and looked at the shelf and the blanket and the small window that showed a square of sky, and he did not come down for supper until Don called him twice. He ate without speaking. He ate the way orphanage children eat, quickly, protectively, his arm curled around his plate as though someone might take it. Don watched this and said nothing, because he did not know what to say. He was a man who understood cattle and fences, and the rhythms of land and season. He did not understand children. He did not understand silence that was not peaceful but defensive, or hunger that was not physical, but something deeper. He understood that the boy in his loft was damaged in ways he could not see, and that understanding was where his competence ended. He tried. He tried the way a man who builds fences tries to build a relationship, with tools and effort, and the expectation that if you do the work, the result will follow. He cooked meals that were adequate and served them on time. He showed Miles the ranch, the barn, the horses, the cattle, the creek where the catfish lived, and Miles looked at all of it with the flat, unenthusiastic expression of a child who has been shown things before by adults who subsequently disappeared. Don took the boy to town for new boots and a winter coat, and Miles accepted them with a politeness that was worse than ingratitude, because politeness from a child that age meant the child had learned that gratitude was a performance expected by adults, rather than a feeling produced by kindness. At night, Don lay in his bed and listened to the boy breathing in the loft above him, and felt the vast, terrifying inadequacy of a man who has been given the most important job of his life and has no idea how to do it. Lila Cathcart lived on the neighboring quarter section, 100 yards east across a fence line that both properties shared. She was 29, a widow of 2 years whose husband had been killed by a bull in the south pasture. She had no children. She ran her small herd and kept a garden and lived alone, with the quiet competence of a woman who had decided that solitude was preferable to the alternatives the town had offered, which consisted primarily of remarriage to men she did not love and sympathy she did not want. She had made peace with her life the way a person makes peace with geography, by accepting it as the ground she stood on and building from there. She missed her husband in the mornings, when the bed was cold, and in the evenings, when the house was quiet. But she had learned that missing someone was not the same as being unable to function without them. She functioned. She was good at functioning. She was less good at admitting that functioning was not the same as living. She saw the boy on the second morning. She was hanging laundry on the line when she looked across the fence and saw a small figure sitting on the top rail of Doan's corral, motionless, watching the horses. The boy sat so still he might have been a post. She watched him for a while and then went back to her laundry and thought about what she knew. Doan's brother had died. The brother's boy was coming. Doan had told her this over the fence line 3 weeks ago with the stiff, uncomfortable expression of a man who had been given a task he did not know how to perform. On the third morning, she brought over a pie. It was apple, made from the last of the stored fruit, and she brought it to Doan's door, and he thanked her, and she saw Miles sitting at the table with a book open in front of him, and his eyes not on the book, but on her, evaluating, the way a cornered animal evaluates an approaching hand. "Hello, Miles," she said. He looked at her. He did not say hello. He looked at the pie, and then at her, and then at his book, and the assessment was complete, and she had not passed. "He does not talk much," Doan said at the door, his voice low. "He does not trust much," Lila said. "Those are different things." She came back the next day. She did not come to the house. She came to the fence line, where she could be seen from the corral where Miles sat, and she worked in her garden. She weeded and hoed, and turned the soil and planted seeds, and she did all of this within sight of the boy on the fence rail, and she did not look at him or speak to him, or acknowledge his presence in any way. She simply existed in his field of vision, doing ordinary things, being ordinary, offering nothing that could be refused. She understood something about trust that Doan did not, that it could not be asked for, only demonstrated. Trust was not a transaction. It was an environment. You created the conditions, and then you waited, the way you waited for seeds to germinate, knowing that the waiting was not passive, but active, that the soil was working even when nothing showed above the surface. On the 5th day, Miles climbed down from the corral fence and walked to the fence line and stood on Doan's side and watched her dig. "What are you planting?" he asked. His voice was rusty, as though the words had been stored in a dry place. "Beans," Lila said, not looking up, "and squash, and some pumpkins, though the pumpkins may not take. The soil is heavy here. We had a garden at the orphanage. It was mostly potatoes. Potatoes are good, but they get lonely without something else growing beside them." Miles was quiet for a moment. "Then, can I help? You can hand me seeds. They are in the tin on the post." He handed her seeds. He did this carefully, counting them into her palm, the way the orphanage had taught him to count things, precisely, as though waste were a sin. Lila planted them without comment, and they worked together in silence. And when the row was finished, Miles walked back to the corral and climbed the fence, and sat and watched the horses, and Lila went back to her weeding, and did not look at him, and did not smile, though the smile was there, held inside where it would not spill and frighten him. She came every day after that. She came to the garden, and Miles came to the fence line, and they worked together with a gradually expanding vocabulary, first about plants, then about soil, then about the worms he found while digging, then about the horses in the corral, then, slowly, about the orphanage. He told her in pieces, the way a person unloads a heavy pack, one item at a time, testing the ground before setting the next one down. The orphanage had been clean and cold. The food was adequate. The beds were in rows. The matron was efficient and not cruel, but she was managing 40 children, and efficiency did not leave room for warmth. Miles had been there 10 months. He had arrived on a Tuesday and had been assigned a bed and a number and a set of chores, and the transition from son to orphan had taken less than an afternoon. "Did anyone visit you?" Lila asked. She was staking tomato plants, and her voice was careful in the way that sharp tools are careful, precise, aware of what could be cut. "No, not your uncle. He did not know I was there. My father and he had not spoken." Lila absorbed this. She looked at the tomato stake in her hand, and the boy standing at the fence with dirt on his fingers, and the expression on his face that she was learning to read. Closed on top, hurt underneath, wanting to trust, and not knowing how. "Your uncle is not good at talking," she said, "but he is good at meaning what he does. He built you a bed. He keeps your plate full. He lets you sit on his fence and watch his horses. Those are things a person does when they care. He does not say he cares. Some people do not say. Some people build." That night, Miles said something to Doan at supper. He said, "Mrs. Cathcart says you are good at meaning what you do." Doan set down his fork and looked at the boy and did not know what to say, because no one had ever described him that way, and the description was so accurate it hurt. "She is a wise woman," Doan said. "She plants things," Miles said, "and they grow. Do you think people grow the same way? I think they can, if someone plants the right things near them." Miles looked at the ranch, the cabin, the barn, the corral, the loft where his cot was, the shelf where his satchel sat. He looked at it the way a person looks at a map they are beginning to understand. Doan noticed the change. He noticed that Miles came down from the loft without being called. He noticed that the boy ate with his arm less tightly curled around his plate. He noticed the dirt on his son's, his nephew's, hands in the evening, garden dirt, and the fact that Miles mentioned Lila's name at supper for the first time, and then twice more, and then regularly, the way a person mentions the weather or the time, as established fact. He walked to the fence line on a Saturday afternoon and found Lila and Miles on their knees in the garden, planting the second row of beans. Lila looked up and saw him, and saw something on his face that he had not known was showing. Gratitude so large it had no words, and a bewilderment that bordered on pain, because this woman had done in a week what he had been unable to do in a month. "How?" he asked. It was not a complete question, but Lila understood it. "I did not ask him to trust me," she said. "I just planted things near him and waited." Doan looked at her, this quiet woman on her knees in the dirt who had lost her husband and had no children, and had given his nephew the one thing the boy needed without making a performance of it. He looked at her and felt something crack in the careful, organized life he had built, a life that had been precise and solvent and completely empty. "Thank you," he said, and his voice broke on the second word, which embarrassed him, which Lila pretended not to notice, which was another kindness in a series of kindnesses that he was beginning to understand were not random, but chosen. The summer passed. Miles grew. He grew taller and louder and less careful, the way children grow when the threat has passed and the ground is solid. He helped Doan with the cattle in the mornings, and Lila with the garden in the afternoons. And he talked about the horses, about the garden, about the book he was reading, about the clouds and the creek and the dog he wanted, about a dream he had where the horses flew, about why the creek changed color after rain, about whether worms had feelings, and if so, what they felt when you picked them up. The unstoppable current of a child's voice that has been dammed and is now free. Doan began finding reasons to walk to the fence line. He brought Lila a fence post he had turned on his lathe because her corner post was rotting. He brought her a bucket of nails she had not asked for. He brought her a pumpkin from her own garden that Miles had picked and insisted on delivering, which was a transparent excuse, and all three of them knew it. "You are a good neighbor," Lila said one evening, standing at the fence with the pumpkin in her hands and the sunset behind her. "I am trying to be," Doan said. "I am not sure I am succeeding." "You are succeeding. Then can I ask you something?" "You can." "Miles needs a mother. I need—" He stopped. He looked at the fence post and the pumpkin and the sunset and the woman, and he could not get the sentence out, because the sentence was too large for the vocabulary he possessed. "You need someone to plant things near you," Lila said, "and wait." "Yes. I have been doing that all summer, Doan." "I know. I am slow." "You are not slow. You are careful. I like careful." They were married in October, with Miles standing between them, holding both their hands. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony at the fence line between their two properties, because Miles said that was where everything started, and the boy was right about that, the way children are right about most things when adults finally stop to listen. The fence came down the following week. Not the whole fence, just the section between the garden and the corral, so that the boy could walk between his two homes without climbing. It was a small thing, a few posts and some wire, but it was the most important renovation either property had ever received.